Zane remembers the exact moment he understood how money actually works. Not how to earn it, not how to invest it, how it works on people. He was 26, sitting in the waiting room of a car dealership in a jacket he'd owned since college, trying to buy a used sedan for $11,000 cash. The salesman glanced at him once, pointed at a laminated brochure on the counter, and went back to his phone call. 40 minutes passed. Nobody came. Zane eventually walked out, drove to a different dealership, and bought the same car from a guy who also didn't particularly care about him. 2 years later, Zane returned to that first dealership to service the car. Different jacket, same face. The same salesman met him at the door, offered him coffee, and asked how his weekend was going. Nothing about Zane had changed, except the jacket, and the watch, and the faint signal those two things were broadcasting about a number nobody in that building had actually seen. That's the whole story we're telling today. Not the money, what the money does to everyone standing around you. Welcome to Wetrix Invest. I'm Zane, and today we're climbing the entire ladder together, from zero net worth all the way to $25 million. At every single rung, I'm going to show you precisely how the people around you shift, why they shift, and what quietly gets lost in both directions as you rise. Because here's the thing nobody mentions in any finance video ever made. Some of the most brutal treatment in this entire story happens at the very bottom, and some of the most quietly damaging treatment happens at the very top. The ladder doesn't get kinder as you climb, it just gets stranger. Before we start climbing, let's establish what we're actually climbing through, because the numbers themselves are the first surprise. The Federal Reserve surveys American household wealth regularly, and the results contain one of the most misleading statistics in public conversation. The average American household net worth sits around $1.2 million. Average. Sounds like we're all quietly comfortable, right? But the median, the household sitting precisely in the center of the entire country, with half of America richer and half poorer, that household is worth closer to $230,000. The average is 5 times higher than the typical, and the reason for that canyon-sized gap is essentially the entire argument of this video. A small concentration of wealth at the top pulls the mathematical average skyward, while the actual middle of the country stands on ground level, wondering why they feel nothing like the statistics suggest they should. Hold that gap in mind. We're about to walk across every inch of it, the bottom, where the tax nobody named gets collected. Zane grew up here, not in genuine poverty, but close enough to feel the edges of it. And what he remembers most isn't the shortage, it's the texture of how the world aimed itself at him. When you have zero or negative net worth, and roughly 1 in 10 American households sits at 0 or below, the world's default setting toward you isn't sympathy, it's suspicion. Walk into a store in clothes that have been washed one too many times, and someone trails you through the aisle under the pretense of restocking shelves. Apply for an apartment and the landlord wants first month, last month, and a security deposit simultaneously. A wall of money demanded at the precise moment you have the least of it. Miss one payment and your bank charges you $35 for the offense of being $3 short. So that $3 coffee mathematically becomes a $38 coffee, and the people paying that fee are exclusively the people who can least absorb it. Economists have a name for this, the poverty premium. And the architecture of it is genuinely inverted logic. If you have good credit and a financial cushion and need $500 for a week, you barely notice the cost. Credit card, paid off, rounding error. But if you're broke, you don't have the card. You walk into a payday lender. And according to consumer protection data, the average payday loan carries an annualized interest rate approaching 400%. The same act of borrowing $500 is priced in precise inverse proportion to how badly you need it. The less you have, the more the system charges you for the temporary use of more. There's a line from the novelist Terry Pratchett that Zane keeps written on a note card above his desk. A wealthy man buys one good pair of boots for $50 that lasts 10 years. A poor man buys a $10 pair every single year. Over a decade, the poor man spent more money and his feet are still wet. Same outcome pursued with the same intention produces completely different costs depending on which rung you start from. That's not a metaphor for inequality. That is the mechanical operation of the bottom of this ladder. And then there's the dimension of this that goes somewhere darker than economics. A Susan Fiske researcher spent years studying how human brains categorize other humans on sight. Her findings revealed that we automatically sort everyone we encounter into a mental grid measuring two things: perceived warmth and perceived competence. Wealthy people tend to get filed as cold but capable, envied, somewhat distrusted, but respected. People at the genuine bottom of the economic ladder, however, get filed somewhere the research describes with uncomfortable clinical precision. In brain scanning studies, when subjects viewed photographs of people experiencing homelessness or severe poverty, the neural regions that typically activate when processing other human beings, the regions associated with registering another person's inner life, showed significantly reduced engagement. The brain was processing those images closer to the way it processes objects than people. Not a metaphor, an actual brain scan. That is the texture of life at the bottom of this ladder. You aren't just struggling financially. You are, to a measurable percentage of the people passing you on the street, not fully registering as a person. The middle, being farmed gently and enjoying it. Move up, scrape together $10,000, then $50,000, and push toward that median neighborhood of $200,000 in net worth. Something real changes. The suspicion disappears. Nobody follows you down the cereal aisle anymore. But what replaces the suspicion isn't warmth. It's something more interesting and in some ways more insidious. You become the default.
Every advertisement, every store layout, every friendly promotional offer, and easy monthly payment plan in the entire consumer economy has been calibrated specifically for you. You are the bullseye, the target demographic, the factory setting that every financial product was designed around. And that sounds flattering until you understand what being the factory setting actually means. It means you are the person the system has decided is worth extracting from. The store credit card at checkout with the instant discount, the 0% financing on furniture that quietly converts to 29% if you miss the payoff window, the car lease that puts you in something you could never purchase. None of these products exist for the person at the bottom. They don't qualify. None of them exist for the genuinely wealthy. They don't need them. They exist for you, specifically, because you have just enough to be worth targeting and not quite enough to know better. Zane describes this phase as being farmed, and the farming is pleasant. Good customer service, friendly emails, valued member language on your loyalty card. Nobody farms land they resent. They keep it watered. They keep it content. They tell it how appreciated it is, right up until the harvest. And the fence around the field is so comfortable that most people spend their entire financial lives inside it and never once notice the fence is there. The $250,000 flip, when institutions start chasing you. Something genuinely new happens around $250,000 to $500,000 in investable assets. For the first time in your life, a financial institution wants you. Not your business in the abstract, you specifically. Letters arrive with nice language about private client status. A named human being calls to introduce themselves. After a lifetime of pressing 1 for English and holding for the next available representative, someone at your bank calls you to check in. No problem to report, just checking in, wanting to know if there's anything you need. Zane calls this the profit line, and once you see it, it reframes every interaction you've ever had with a financial institution. Below the profit line, you cost the institution more than you generate, so they route you into automated systems to make you cheaper to serve. Above the profit line, you generate more than you cost, so they assign a human being to make sure you feel valued enough to stay. Same bank, same you. The only variable is which side of one invisible threshold your balance cleared. The fruit basket will arrive. Zane promises this. There is no clearer signal in American financial life that you have crossed a meaningful wealth threshold than the unsolicited delivery of artisanal pears. The friendliness is genuine. It is also precisely calibrated to the dollar value of your account. Both things are true simultaneously, and one of them does not cancel the other. $1 million, the word that cashes a check the number can't cover. Here's the quiet devastation of the $1 million milestone. $1 million invested conservatively, drawing the standard 4% annually without depleting the principal, generates $40,000 per year. $40,000. That is a solid, dignified, stable income. It is emphatically not a yacht. It is not a lifestyle you'd recognize from any popular depiction of wealth. Millionaire as a word is still writing checks that millionaire as a number stopped being able to cash sometime around the mid-90s. But here's where the human story takes its first genuinely uncomfortable turn. Once the million becomes visible, and eventually it always becomes visible, the phone calls start. Not from banks this time, from family. Zane watched this happen to a close friend who came into money through a business exit. The cousin, who hadn't been in contact for 2 years, suddenly needed to catch up over lunch. The call was warm, genuinely warm, for 11 minutes. Then came the pivot. A business concept, just needed someone who believed in it. The friend told Zane afterward that the worst part wasn't the ask, it was that he'd spent the entire 11 minutes waiting for it and missed everything the cousin actually said about his life. This is the tax nobody lists in any financial planning document. Not a fee, not a penalty, the slow erosion of your ability to take the people you love entirely at face value. The money didn't make them worse people. It installed a small interrogation room in the back of your mind, and now everyone you care about gets walked through it, whether they've done anything to deserve it or not. $5 million, when the word no quietly retires. At $5 million, Zane identifies the single most significant shift in daily lived experience across this entire climb. You stop hearing no. Normal life is constructed almost entirely from small no's. That table is reserved. The doctor can't see you for 3 weeks. The flight is full. The policy doesn't apply to exceptions. These tiny walls are so constant and so universal that most people process them as just reality, just how the world is. They are not how the world is. They are how the world is for people below a certain balance. At $5 million, the walls begin moving out of your way before you reach them. The fully booked restaurant discovers availability. The sold-out event has a seat that wasn't publicly listed. The policy that applies to everyone else turns out to contain an exception with your name already written in it. Concierge medical practices, where a physician carries perhaps 50 patients instead of 2,000 and provides a personal phone number with same-day access, begin at a few $1,000s annually and scale to arrangements that would consume a working person's entire salary. Berkeley psychologist Paul Piff documented what this uninterrupted preferential treatment does to a person's psychology in a now famous experiment. He set up a rigged Monopoly game where one player received double the starting money and rolled 2 dice instead of 1. The outcome was predetermined from the first move. What Piff observed was that the structurally advantaged players became louder and more physically dominant at the table. They consumed more of the shared snacks, and when the inevitable victory arrived and researchers asked them to explain how they'd won, they described their strategy, their decision-making, their skill. They had completely internalized credit for an outcome the rules had guaranteed them before the game began. When every door opens before you reach it, you eventually stop noticing that someone is holding it. $10 million, the question that has no answer. Zane says this is the rung where a particular question moves in and never leaves. At $10 million, wealth stops being concealable. The property, the school the children attend, the texture of daily life, it announces itself. And once it's announced, every new relationship that forms does so in its shadow. A Boston College study surveyed households at this wealth level and above, asking, essentially, whether they were content. The portrait that emerged was not the carefree ease the number implies. It was persistent anxiety, a low-grade isolation, real uncertainty about whether their children would be shaped or hollowed by the inheritance, and a question that returned in every interview conducted. If the money disappeared tomorrow, who in my life would still be here? That question is the one Zane says no amount of additional wealth answers. More money doesn't resolve it. Past a certain point, more money just makes it louder by giving more people more reasons to stay regardless of their actual feelings. $25 million. Behind glass. At the top of this ladder, something happens that is different not just in degree, but in kind from every rung below it. The friction of ordinary life, the lines, the holds, the counters, the small, unscripted exchanges with strangers gets managed away entirely.
A family office, the small private organization that exists at this wealth level solely to administer one family's affairs, removes virtually every point of contact with daily inconvenience. Someone handles the travel, someone manages the properties, someone is always available to handle whatever requires handling. And here is what Zane considers the most overlooked cost of this arrangement. Every piece of friction that gets smoothed away was also a point of genuine human contact. The barista who eventually learned Nathan's name learned it because Nathan stood at a counter like everyone else. Eliminate the counter and you eliminate the barista. Build a life smooth enough and you can move through entire weeks without a single unscripted exchange with someone who isn't, in some capacity, on your payroll. At the bottom of this ladder, Zane notes, the world treated people as less than fully human. At the top, the world treats you with such careful, orchestrated deference that you can begin to feel suspended behind glass, present in rooms, but separated from them by an invisible layer that comfort installed without asking permission. Different mechanism, uncomfortably similar result. The research on whether any of this actually produces happiness is one of the more fascinating scientific arguments of recent decades. A 2010 study suggested emotional well-being plateaued around $75,000 annually. A 2021 study with more sophisticated real-time measurement found no such plateau. The two research teams eventually sat down together and published a reconciliation in 2023. Their combined finding, for most people, money does continue improving daily emotional experience well past any previously identified ceiling. But for people carrying pain that money cannot reach, grief, isolation, the particular loneliness that has no financial cause, the curve flattens not because of the money, but because the wound was never the kind money treats. Same $5 million landing on two different people in the same month. One of them was mostly whole to begin with, and the money genuinely opens things up, smooths edges, creates possibility. The other is carrying something with no price tag, and the $5 million lands almost silently while the actual weight doesn't shift 1 degree. The money didn't fail. It was never the right instrument for that particular problem.
Zane ends every conversation about this topic the same way. He goes back to the car dealership, the salesman who ignored him at 26 and offered him coffee at 28. He doesn't tell that story to generate resentment toward the salesman. The salesman was reading signals the same way all of us do, processing information quickly and allocating attention accordingly. That's human. What the story reveals is the mechanism, the invisible sorting that runs constantly beneath every interaction, calibrating treatment to perceived economic position in ways so automatic that neither party is fully conscious it's happening. The goal, Zane says, isn't to climb the ladder fast enough that you get the coffee sooner. The goal is to climb it clear-eyed enough that when the coffee arrives, you understand exactly what it is. And you've kept enough people around who knew you back when nobody was offering you anything, who can remind you which treatment is about the account and which treatment is actually about you. That distinction is the only thing on this entire ladder that money cannot purchase. And it is, Zane will tell you without hesitation, the only thing on it that genuinely matters. Drop a comment below telling Wetrix Invest which rung surprised you most. And if this changed even one assumption you carried in here, share it with someone still standing at a counter waiting for a name on their cup.